We humans, the genus Homo, have come a remarkably long way in the 2.8 million years we've been around. And most of the good part happened recently. In just the last 2 centuries, we've built a world of medicine and technology that's pushed the global lifespan to about 73 years. 73. That's the number to keep in your head, because we're going to be coming back to it. Because the road here was not smooth. For most of human history, life was short and brutally hard. In 18th century France, life expectancy at birth sat somewhere between 27 and 30. In classical Greece, around 25. The Bronze Age, 26. Go back to the Neolithic and it drops to about 20. And those, I want to stress this, are the good old days. Those are Homo sapiens, us. Comparatively, we have had it easy. Because if you go back far enough, to the very dawn of our genus, you find a human species that had it so catastrophically, almost comically bad, that I'm not sure any of us would survive a single week in their shoes. One study looked at a 2-million-year-old species called Homo habilis and found something genuinely hard to comprehend. The average age of death came out to about 12 years old. 12. 6 times lower than today. Most of them didn't live long enough to become teenagers. And here's the kicker. That number is almost certainly too generous. The study looked at 26 specimens and noticed something telling. There were almost no infants or newborns in the sample. Which doesn't mean babies weren't dying, it means their small, fragile bones simply didn't survive to be found. Account for that, and the real life expectancy drops even lower than 12. So this is, by a wide margin, the last human you'd ever want to wake up as. Homo habilis may represent the single worst time in all of history to have been a human being. Which raises the obvious question. Why? Why was their existence such an unrelenting nightmare? And the answer, I'm afraid, is that absolutely everything was stacked against them. Starting with their own bodies. Homo habilis was one of the smallest humans that ever lived, possibly averaging under 4 feet tall, around a third shorter than we are, and in some cases weighing barely 60% of what we do. A small body is a vulnerable body. And unlike the Neanderthals who'd come much later, those reinforced tanks of muscle and bone, habilis had no compensating robustness. They were small and lightly built. The worst of both worlds. And they spent a good part of their lives up in the trees. They were partially arboreal, one of the earliest members of our genus, still carrying ape-like features, longer arms and grippier hands made for climbing and swinging through branches. Now, climbing is usually a gift. It's an escape hatch. When a predator shows up, you go vertical and you live. But here's the cruel irony of Homo habilis. They had the escape hatch, and their own lifestyle dragged them right back down through it. Because of their diet. You'd assume a small, tree-dwelling early human ate leaves and fruit. But habilis was actually one of the more dedicated meat-eaters among early humans, with big incisors for slicing flesh and a thick, powerful jaw, thicker than any living ape or human for ripping meat off a carcass. And meat doesn't grow in trees. So their appetite forced them down onto the open ground, again and again. Worse, they had a taste for fish, which dragged them right to the water's edge, and we'll get to why that was such a spectacularly bad idea. But it wasn't just that they ate meat, it was how they got it. Because Homo habilis, for reasons that almost defy belief given their disadvantages, specialized in scavenging. Picture it, a 4-foot, lightly built creature with no claws, no fangs, and the most basic stone tools imaginable, trying to muscle in on a fresh kill. One group of researchers worked out that Realistically, the best they could reliably do was chase off a jackal or a cheetah. And that means almost nothing, because the African savanna they lived in was crawling with far bigger carnivores that would happily show up to contest a carcass, and then, just as happily, turn on the little human trying to claim it. Because that's the other half of the horror. Homo habilis wasn't just competing with predators for food. Homo habilis was food. They were, to put it bluntly, easy pickings. So if you were one of them, every single day carried the live threat of being killed and eaten by a genuinely diverse cast of carnivores, each with its own distinctive way of ending you. At least there was variety. Let me introduce you to the lineup. Over 30 potential predators have been identified in their time and place, and the big cats did the most damage. There was Megantereon, a jaguar-sized saber-tooth with a heavier build and, unnervingly, lower limbs sized more like a lion's, tipped with huge paws and recurved claws. Once it pinned you, you'd meet its saber teeth, two enlarged canines designed to sink into the throat and sever the arteries, which at least would have ended things in seconds. The alternative was worse. In rare cases, a saber-tooth would take the victim's entire head into its mouth. And we know this happened to an actual human specimen, found with puncture marks on the back of its skull at an angle proving the bite came from the front. The cat had put the human's whole head in its jaws. And here's the truly chilling part. Chemical analysis shows Megantereon ate so many of these early humans that it actually altered the carbon signature in its bones. It wasn't just a predator that occasionally took a human. It was, by the numbers, a human specialist. And it had company. Dinophelis prowled the same ground, almost certainly hunting them too. So did Homotherium, whose teeth carried wavy, irregular serrations that let it slice and puncture in the same bite. And then there was Amphimacherodus, one of the largest cats that ever lived, some individuals reaching the weight of a male polar bear. At that size, a single swipe of a paw could kill, and many victims were taken young. You couldn't even reliably climb away from these things, because some were powerful jumpers rather than long-distance chasers. The tree was no longer safe. Then come the hyenas, and again, not one, but several. The standout was Pachycrocuta, one of the largest hyenas of all time, lioness-sized, with a bone-crushing bite that's among the strongest pound for pound of any land mammal that has ever lived. That bite was a double problem. It could destroy you directly, and it could crack open bones for marrow, which meant Pachycrocuta showed up at exactly the carcasses your scavenging ancestor was trying to reach, and it likely hunted in packs. The other one, Chasmoporthetes, was smaller and built like a cheetah, nicknamed the running hyena. A pack of fast, nimble hyenas was arguably a worse way to go than one big one. And since habilis was a poor runner at best, outrunning them simply wasn't on the table. But none of these, not the cats, not the hyenas, were the deadliest thing in this world. That title belonged to what waited in the water. Giant crocodiles. And remember, habilis loved to fish, and they fished with their bare hands. It's almost as if they were volunteering. The crocs were happy to accept. The most notorious belonged to the same genus as today's crocodiles, but scaled up into monsters. One of them earned a name that tells you everything. Crocodilus anthropophagus, the man-eater. The species name literally means human eater, and it was given for good reason. We have its bite marks on human bones. In one location, two young habilis individuals were found with their legs and feet mangled in a pattern matching this crocodile's teeth. It ambushed from the water, targeted the legs, and finished the job with a drowning or a death roll that tore the limbs clean off. Both of these individuals lost limbs that way. Adults of this croc reached around 25 feet and 1.5 tons, bigger than the largest saltwater crocodile ever reliably measured. And just to complete the nightmare image, it had 2 bony ridges above its eyes, like horns. A horned, man-eating crocodile larger than anything in our rivers today. And here's the detail that ties it all together, and it's brutal. The very specimen that defines the species Homo habilis, the holotype, a fossil called OH7 and its associated remains, may itself have been a victim. Its foot bones show deep, broad puncture wounds matching a giant crocodile's bite. It seems to have lost a foot to one of these animals. And as if that weren't enough, researchers found shallow grooves on the skull that don't match any crocodile, but do match the bite of a large cat, around the size of a leopard. So the animal we named this entire species after may have been bitten by a crocodile and mauled by a big cat. The textbook example of this human is a textbook example of how horribly they died. And we're still not done, because the crocs and cats and hyenas were just the headliners. There were eagles snatching the young, venomous and constricting snakes, which kill tens of thousands across Africa even today, and territorial giants like rhinos, hippos and elephants that didn't hunt them, but trampled them all the same. Even other humans were a threat. Habilis shared its landscape with larger, smarter relatives like Homo erectus, whose brain could be nearly double the size and who had fire and far better tools. In any confrontation on the ground, the small, second smallest brained habilis was outmatched. And on top of all of it, the predators, the rivals, the climate itself was turning against them. The Pleistocene brought wild swings, cold snaps and droughts that made food scarce and drove outright starvation. And as food vanished, habilis had to scavenge even more, which pushed them into contact with even more predators. Predators who were themselves hungrier and more desperate. A vicious, closing loop. So how on earth did they survive at all for over 500,000 years? Probably through the few things they had going for them. Simple tools that unlocked bone marrow and tough plants others couldn't eat. The faint possibility they built crude shelters against the cold, and above all, numbers. Groups may have reached up to 85 members, and there's safety in a crowd. More eyes, lower odds that any one individual gets picked off. Though, looking at that lifespan, you have to wonder how much it really helped. Whatever the reason they endured, one thing is beyond dispute. Of all the times and all the bodies a human could have been born into, Homo habilis drew the shortest straw imaginable. They lived fast, died young, and died horribly. Hunted from the trees, the ground, and the water all at once. So the next time you're having a rough day, just remember that number we started with, 73. And spare a thought for your distant cousin who, 2 million years ago, would have considered making it to 13 the luckiest break of their life. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.